Okay, so good evening, welcome to tonight's share. So there are two topics we're going to discuss tonight. The first is the halacha one, and it's Selichos, did you know? This is an overview of Hilchos Selichos, which of course we begin saying in Mitzvah Hashem this Motzei Shabbos, Sunday, and it's just an overview, a quick reminder of some of the key issues that are important to refresh ourselves before we begin again in Mitzvah Hashem davening Selichos. And then of course we'll have our Parsha share soon. So, take a look at that handout. The first box is an extract from the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. The Kitzur says, "Miyom Rishon shekodim Rosh Hashanah," from Sunday before Rosh Hashanah, mashkim in the Selichos. We begin saying Selichos. We get up early and we start saying Selichos, and that begins, of course, this Sunday, this Motzei Shabbos, this Sunday. Ve'imchol Rosh Hashanah b'yom Sheni b'yom Shlishi. If Rosh Hashanah falls on either Monday or Tuesday, as of course it does this year, we don't begin on the Sunday immediately before Rosh Hashanah, but we begin a week and a bit before. So of course this year, Rosh Hashanah is, please God, Monday, Tuesday, a week. This time 2 weeks, Rosh Hashanah is over. Amazingly. So next Monday week, Tuesday week is Rosh Hashanah, so we don't begin on the day before, rather we begin this Motzei Shabbos, this Sunday. Now, it needs to be a minimum of 4 days. Why? Take a look at the Mishnah Berurah in paragraph 2. The Mishnah Berurah says, "Mishum sheharbe noagim lihisanos asar yomim." The reason why it's a minimum of 4 days that we say Selichos, a minimum of 4 days before Rosh Hashanah, is because some people have the minhag to fast asar yomim for 10 days, asar semei tshuva, imam Yom Kippurim, with including Yom Kippur. Now, you've got a problem. Because there are 4 days within the Aser Semei Tshuva where you're not allowed to fast. What are those 4 days? There are 2 of the days are Rosh Hashanah themselves. You can't fast on Rosh Hashanah itself. The Shabbos Shuvah, you're always going to have, within 10 days of the Aser Semei Tshuva, you're going to have a Shabbos Shuvah in there. You can't fast on Shabbos. And what's the 4th day? The 4th day when you can't fast during the Aser Semei Tshuva is, of course, Erev Yom Kippur, where there is a mitzvah to eat. The Erev Yom Kippur, and that's the 4th day. So, Lokach tzorich lahashlim daled yomim kodim Rosh Hashanah, and therefore, to make up for the 10 days of fasting, there are those who fast 4 days before Rosh Hashanah, plus the 6 days within the Aser Semei Tshuva, to make a total of 10. And therefore, to make it sort of standardized, we don't just always start 4 days before Rosh Hashanah. We always begin on the Sunday before, or if it's on a Monday or Tuesday, the Sunday a week before. Okay, that's one of the reasons why it's 4 days before Rosh Hashanah. Then the Mishnah Berurah gives a second reason, perhaps better known. Because we find when it comes to karbonos, when in the days of old, when we would bring karbonos, you would have to inspect the animal for a period of up to 4 days before you could offer it up to check that it's free of any mum, of any blemish. And with all the karbonos in Parshas Pinchas, it says, and you should offer up an oila. But Rosh Hashanah it changes the nusach. The expression is not v'hikravtem; it says va'asisem oila. L'lamed sheberosh Hashanah ya'aseh adam atzmai ki'ilu makrives atzmai. It's as if he's offering up himself. He is the carbon, like sheep, kibnei morim. We're sort of passing before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like individual sheep, before the shepherd. And therefore, in the same way that a sheep, when he's being brought as a carbon, needs 4 days of physical examination to make sure he's free from blemishes, well, so to us, that reminds us that 4 days before Rosh Hashanah, we begin and we sort of introspect and we make sure that we are free from blemishes, which is really the focus of Selichos. And therefore, Chazal fixed 4 days to introspect, to check out our own blemishes, to make sure that we are clean of any chait, that we can do tshuva. Okay, so that's the reason why we begin when we begin. When is the best time to recite Selichos? I keep saying Motzei Shabbos, Sunday morning. When is the actual opportune and best time to daven Selichos? So the Mishnah Berurah says, Noagim lokum ba'ashmoires. The minhag is to get up early in the morning to say Selichos, to soif halayla, because at the very end of the night, HaKadosh Baruch Hu shot ba'olam hazeh v'hu eis ratzain. The Gemara says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sort of he roams around our world late at night and is considered an eis ratzain. And therefore, the ideal time is just before dawn, at the very end of the night. That's considered the eis ratzon, the auspicious time. And indeed, that's what most shuls do. If you daven, depends on the time of year, depends which country you're in. But let's say in Eretz Yisrael, you know, Selichos maybe at 5:30 in the morning, before Alois HaShachar, that would be the most ideal time to do it. Now, it doesn't mean that's the only time to do it. When is the next best time to do it? So the next best time is actually halachic midnight. Halachic midnight is not 12 p.m. or a.m. actually. It's not 12. It's halachic midnight. In other words, it's halfway between Tzeis, nightfall, and Alois HaShachar, whatever time that happens to be. You know, normally approximately 1 o'clock. We're familiar Seder night. You know, make sure you eat afikonim by 1:07 or whatever it is. So whatever halachic midnight is, and therefore the next best time is to do it then. But the truth is, they can be said during the day. And therefore, most shuls, what they would do, certainly here in London, is that if Shachris is at 7 o'clock, they would make Selichos at 6:15 or 6:30. Immediately before that, depends if it's the slightly longer Selichos, the shorter Selichos. But that's what most people will do. Now, there is, of course, what's become more popular is to say Selichos, to have an evening time to do it. 11 o'clock, sometimes a bit earlier even. Is that acceptable? For a lot of people, that seems to be it's preferred. They've got to get up early. To get up very early is challenging. They've got a full day at work, and certainly for Sephardim, it's very challenging. They're over halfway through Selichos for Elul. So is it okay? So there's a famous tshuva of Rav Moshe. I've got it here on the sheet. It says Rav Moshe in Rechaim Chelek Beis Siman Kufay. He says the following: if a person can't do it at the times I've just described, i.e., just before dawn, or halachic midnight, which is in the middle of the night, really for a lot of people, 1 o'clock in the middle of the night, then and if as a result the community will not daven slichas, they just won't get a minyan, it's permitted as a one-off, as an exceptional situation, to allow other times, gam mitchila, ki bedvarim elu ein makar megemara elahem medivrei rabbeinu achronim al pi sifrei kabbalah shemistaber she'ein bo zeh inyan issa. There's no issa to do it then. It's certainly not ideal, but it is permitted in the circumstances which Rav Moshe has described, i.e. that you might not get a minyan, etc., etc. Ela she'ein moelim b'koyach yud gimel midas sheish b'haftocha, etc., etc. Okay, fine. So really one says slichas ideally before dawn, that's the eis ratzon, that's the most auspicious time, or then halachic midnight. If not then one does it other times in the morning, even earlier before midnight. There are grounds and extenuating circumstances to do it then. But they can be done during the day. Certainly for people that they're busy, they won't do it otherwise, then it would be okay to do it at other times. Now, what are the technical setup for doing it? Well, the first thing first is netilas yadayim. So let's say you do it in the morning, you get up early in the morning. If one says slichas before shacharis, then you do have to say first of all al netilas yadayim. You need to wash, of course, negel vasa anytime when you wake up in the morning. But then you say al netilas yadayim asher yotza. You say elokai neshama, and you also have to say birchas haTorah. The reason why you say birchas haTorah before slichas is because slichas contains lots of psukim, and therefore before you can say these psukim, you need to say birchas haTorah. If slichas is said before Alois HaShachar, which is the eis ratzon, then al netilas yadayim should only be said after slichas. You need to still wash your hands for negel vasa, but that is said. After slichas. Okay. Now, a common question that is often asked is, what if a person can't keep up with the minyan? Sometimes slichas is said quite quickly, and you're sort of saying them with kavanah slowly. Well, what to do? So the poskim say that a person who cannot keep up with the pace of the minyan, it's better he should actually recite the slichas at his own pace with kavanah a bit more slowly. However, he should join the minyan at a few critical points. The critical points are the Yud Gimel Midas. The Yud Gimel Midas are Hashem Hashem Kel Racham L'Chanun, that we repeat and we say it in unison. That can only be said with a minyan. We can't say it as individuals. And it's important, therefore, where even if you're at a slower pace and you haven't quite caught up with the minyan, to make sure you join the minyan for that point and to say the Yud Gimel Midas. Why is it called the Yud Gimel Midas? Because this pasuk, Hashem Hashem Kel Racham V'Chanun, contains the Yud Gimel Midas of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem, Hashem, which is actually two separate Midas. Hashem, Hashem, Keil, Rachum, V'chanun, Erech Apayim, V'rav Chesed, Noitzer Chesed La'alofim, Noitze Ovoin V'fesha V'chet V'nake, V'ovin V'nake. Yes, again, Hashem, Hashem, Keil, Rachum V'chanun, Erech Apayim, V'rav Chesed V'emes, Noitzer Chesed La'alofim, Noitze Ovoin V'fesha V'chet V'nake. There you go, 13. 13, those are the Yud Gimel Midas that we refer to. And that should be said with a minyan. So a person can daven at their own pace, but when it comes to the Yud Gimel Midas, he should catch up with the tzibur. And also the other 2 points are Shema Kuleinu. A person should make sure that they're with the tzibur at that point, and vidui as well, to say collectively in unison. Okay, what about a person who says, it's double Dutch to me, it's Chinese. Can I say Selichos in English? Is that allowed? Some of it's in Aramaic, and therefore it's hard to access it. So the halachas are that the tefillah generally is more powerful in Lashon HaKodesh, and even if you don't understand the words of Lashon HaKodesh, it's preferred to say it in Lashon HaKodesh. However, of course it is important to try and understand what you're saying, and if a person cannot recite them fluently in Lashon HaKodesh in Hebrew, then you can say them in English. But anyone who is familiar with, be able to say Lashon HaKodesh and to speak Hebrew or to say the words, then even if you don't understand them, it's better to say it in Lashon HaKodesh. But it is allowed to say it in English if reading fluent Hebrew is a problem. Okay, there isn't time, but that's the Bi'aloch, the next on the sheet. Okay, women, interestingly, are not obligated in Selichos. Many women do, and it's a very commendable thing to do. But they're not mechuyev in Selichos. Do you need to have a minyan when you say Selichos? Again, it's preferable. It's always preferable to daven with a minyan, but it's not essential. A person is traveling, is away, or whatever it may be, then you are allowed to daven Selichos b'yechidus. But like I mentioned before, the Yud Gimel Midas can only be said with a minyan. There is a sort of an interesting option of just reading the psukim as they appear in the Torah. There's no harm in reading psukim from the Torah. And the pasuk of Hashem Hashem Kel Rachum V'chanun is a pasuk in the Torah. So a person can read them with the tune of the Torah reading, the laning, the trop, and that way that overcomes the problem. But generally speaking, you don't do the Yud Gimel Midas unless you are with a minyan. And there are, at the very end of Selichos, when the Machnasei Rachamim, those parts which in Aramaic, again for those parts, many Selichos will say you only say that with a minyan. 2 more quick points. Tachanun appears in Selichos, at the very end of Selichos, and there's discussion about whether you're allowed to say Tachanun at night. And generally speaking, you do not say Tachanun at night. That one should make sure that Mincha, we try and daven before Shkia, and therefore Tachanun is said before it gets to Sofek Laila. However, although Tachanun generally is said not before nightfall, it's Selichos. If Selichos is said at night, for example, Motzei Shabbos or whenever it may be, you do say Tachanun. And it's interesting, for ladies, they're not also always familiar with Tachanun because it's not part of the tefillah for many ladies. However, and I remember once giving a shir I mentioned Tachanun in the girls' school, giving some halacha shir there, and I mentioned Tachanun, I said about Nefilas Apayim, it's called Nefilas Apayim, and you actually put you bury your head in your arm, and they didn't know what I was talking about. And it could be that some of you are not familiar with what I'm talking about. Okay, but if you go to a shul every morning, and even at Mincha, unless you go on the days when they don't say Tachanun, which, there are days when you don't say, but that's what happens. And you put a man will say Tachanun, which happens straight after Shemini Esrei, and when it comes to Tachanun, he will bury his head in his hand and he says Tachanun. That paragraph he'll say like that. If you're wearing tefillin in the morning, you will do it in the hand, the other arm. So I put my tefillin, I'm a right-handed person, so I put my tefillin on my left hand. So I'll say Tachanun, I put my head in my right arm. In Mincha time, when I'm not wearing tefillin, so I'll bury my head in my left arm. So that's standard practice, which boys and men are very familiar with. Just looking around the room, I think this looks like this might be new to some. Okay, so if you do go to shul mincha and suddenly everyone buries their head, you now know what is going on. And it's said even in situations where you don't say it. So, for example, when there is a chosen present, you don't say Tachanun. Lots of occasions when you don't say Tachanun. they tell the famous joke in some certain shuls. There's you sort of the days when you don't say tachanun are more common than the days you do say tachanun. And one time in one Hasidic shtibel, they got very upset because they couldn't find the reason not to say tachanun. So they say tachanun. So they went out to the Rav, and they said, "We don't know what to do. There seems to be no reason. There's no yahrzeit. There's no simcha. There's no. It's like, so what? We're gonna have to say tachanun." So the Rav says, "Really? There's no yahrzeit today. There's no fantastic. No tachanun, right?" So that was his response to it. Okay. And last point is standing during Selichos. It is preferable to stand during Selichos. However, of course, if this is difficult, one should at least stand when saying the Yud Gimel Midas, the 13 attributes of mercy. And when you say Vidui as well, the Yoshamnu is when a person should be standing. That's the bottom Mata Ephraim. But Tov La'amod B'Shas HaMiras HaSlichos is preferable to stand when you're saying Slichos. Umisha Kosh Le'La'amod B'Miras HaSlichos. And if it's difficult for a person to stand, Al Kol Polim Yamod B'Shas HaMiras Kamech Yeshev U'Shleishos Midas U'B'Shas HaMiras HaViduim. So apart from those points, one is able to sit, but it's preferable to stand. Okay, so that's really just a quick review of the halachas of Selichos. To explain the two reasons why we start 4 days before, or like this year when Rosh Hashanah is on a Monday, Tuesday, a week and a bit before, always a Sunday before. When is the best time? Ideally just before Aleis HaShachar, just before dawn. The next best time is halachic midnight, but saying at other times is certainly acceptable. And even before midnight, sort of late evening, 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, which has become sort of, I think, increasingly more popular, in extenuating circumstances, it seems to be allowed. Not to forget the Tilas Yadayim and said in the morning, Asher Yotzar and Lekhan Hashem Brachas Torah, and a person can do it at his own pace, but needs to catch up with the Sibur at various points. Can be said in English if reading Lashon HaKodesh is more difficult. Women are not obligated, but they may do so, and it's commendable if they want to. And davening with a minyan, Tachanun, we've spoken about. Okay, Seder, we'll leave it there.